Greta Thunberg. The teenage climate warrior who ditched school, scolded world leaders, and somehow made saving the planet feel like a hostile takeover. She's yelling at presidents, blocking oil terminals, dropping viral insults, and cashing in on anti-capitalism with a book tour, because irony burns cleaner than diesel. No, subtlety is not part of her plan. Let's rip into the chaos that is everything wrong with Greta Thunberg. Sorry to interrupt, but Greta's yelling at world leaders, and I'm yelling at you. Hit that subscribe button now. Thanks. Apocalypse now, homework later. So let's rewind to the beginning of Greta's global guilt tour. At the tender age of 11, she reportedly watched a school video about climate change and spiraled into a full-blown emotional collapse. Most kids that age are crying over scraped knees or the fact that their Tamagotchi died. But Greta, she disappeared into darkness, stopped eating, stopped talking, and became paralyzed by the sheer horror of carbon emissions. And thus, a movement was born. Her parents eventually had to change their entire lifestyle just to get her to speak again, because nothing says family bonding like being held hostage by climate anxiety. Since then, she's turned that trauma into a full-time career of global finger-wagging, often telling world leaders to panic and claiming humanity is on the brink of collapse. Is climate change a real issue? Yes. Should we be scared? Maybe. But should our moral compass be dictated by someone whose origin story reads like the pilot episode of a dystopian teen drama? That's where things get a little murky. Greta turned a personal mental health crisis into a worldwide movement. And while that's inspiring to some, it's downright unsettling to others. Because when your primary policy recommendation is freak out now and maybe recycle later, it might be time to rethink your messaging strategy, preferably with less existential dread and more actual science. Class dismissed? Again. Let's talk about the world's most high-profile truancy case. Greta Thunberg launched her climate fame with a school strike in 2018. One Friday off, then another, until skipping class became her entire brand. Fridays for Future went global. Millions of kids ditched algebra to hold up cardboard signs and shout at traffic. And sure, it was historic, but not everyone was clapping. Some educators and parents started asking the obvious question: should a teenager really be trading education for endless photo ops and podiums? Critics worried she was encouraging kids to abandon school, not for emergencies, but for politics. And while Greta insists that climate change is more important than classroom attendance,
you can shove your climate crisis, you can shove your climate crisis, you can shove your climate crisis up your ass.
others noted that if you want to save the world, maybe learning math, science, and diplomacy could actually help. Crazy concept, right? Meanwhile, Greta aged into her early 20s and still gets called a student activist, despite seemingly being enrolled in nothing but protest circuits. At some point, striking from school stops being a movement and starts being just not going. But hey, at least she's consistent. Climate change may be complex, but Greta's educational strategy is simple. Why do homework when you can shame a prime minister on live TV? No way, Norway. Imagine being such a menace that an entire political party in a foreign country wants to deport you, and you don't even live there. That's Greta Thunberg's new claim to fame. In October 2023, Norway's third largest political party, the Progress Party, proposed banning and deporting her altogether. Their reasoning? Greta had been involved in multiple disruptive protests, including one that blocked access to an oil terminal, Norway's version of a national treasure. You know you've crossed a line when a country known for its calm, polite citizens goes full "get off our lawn" on you. Now, Greta's fans cried foul, claiming this was an attack on free speech and peaceful activism. But many Norwegians had a different reaction, something along the lines of, "Please take your climate cosplay somewhere else." This is not a teenager with a sign. This is an international icon crashing countries like their open mic nights, disrupting vital infrastructure in the name of awareness. And when you're so committed to the bit that you end up getting deportation proposals from Scandi nations, maybe it's time to reassess your life choices. Look, activism is one thing, but if your legacy in a country ends with, "Please never come back," you might want to consider that maybe, just maybe, you're not helping. Time to tone it down. When Greta landed the 2019 Time Magazine Person of the Year cover, the world collectively went, "Wait, that's the shot you chose?" There she stood, alone by the sea, striking a pose that screamed Haunted Lighthouse Keeper meets indie album cover. The lighting was moody, her stare could melt glaciers, and the whole thing looked like a promo for a Scandinavian crime drama called "The Ice is Melting and So Is My Patience." Time called it iconic. The internet called it unintentionally hilarious. People photoshopped her into shipwreck scenes, horror movie posters, and medieval ghost stories. Because when you brand yourself as the angriest teen on Earth, maybe try a cover photo that says "leader" instead of "last survivor of climate apocalypse." Now don't get us wrong, being Person of the Year is a huge deal. But the photo shoot felt less like celebrating activism and more like a perfume ad from a world where emotions are banned. Introducing CO2, the scent of judgment. Greta deserved recognition, sure, but maybe not one that made her look like she was either summoning the ocean to rise or waiting for a Viking funeral. We love a good metaphor, but this one came with a fog machine and a side of cringe. The Indian Toolkit Tango. In 2021, Greta Thunberg tried her hand at long-distance political activism and accidentally went full international incident. It started with her tweeting a toolkit in support of Indian farmers protesting government reforms. Sounds innocent, right? A cute little Google Doc for global solidarity. Except this toolkit was editable, publicly shared, and mysteriously detailed. So detailed, in fact, that it sparked a police investigation in India and accusations of foreign interference. That's right. Greta's Google Doc turned into Exhibit A in a national security case. Supporters claimed she was just being helpful, raising awareness, standing in solidarity, all that feel-good activist stuff. But critics, especially in India, weren't so convinced. Politicians accused her of fueling unrest and interfering in a sovereign nation's affairs. It was like watching someone try to play climate chess and accidentally flip the whole board. She may have been in Sweden, but her tweet lit a political firestorm halfway around the world. Here's the thing, it's one thing to comment on global issues. It's another to wade into a delicate political crisis with a digital Molotov cocktail and no exit plan. Greta might have thought she was sharing a helpful link. But when your activism ends up in a police report, you might want to pause before copy-pasting your next revolution. Stop, drop, and oversimplify. Our house is on fire. Greta's go-to catchphrase. Powerful? Maybe. Accurate? Not quite. While it sounds like something a firefighter yells while leaping out of a second-story window, Greta's been using it for years to describe climate change, over and over again, as if the planet is literally moments away from spontaneously combusting. Scientists? Many of them just facepalmed and muttered, "That's not how climate science works." Yes, the Earth is warming. Yes, we need action. But when you reduce an incredibly complex, multifaceted global crisis into a slogan fit for a kindergarten fire drill, things get messy. Scientists who actually study the issue have criticized her for boiling everything down to emotional scare tactics instead of evidence-based nuance. Because apparently shouting "panic now" is not a solid substitute for actual policy. And while the slogan gets headlines, it also makes climate skeptics roll their eyes so hard they sprain their foreheads. Oversimplification might grab attention, but it also makes it easier for critics to dismiss real concerns as teenage melodrama. Climate change deserves more than bumper sticker wisdom. But Greta keeps setting rhetorical fires and then scolding people for not grabbing buckets. At some point, we need less drama and more data. Tiny cars, giant ego. You knew the internet was broken when Greta Thunberg and Andrew Tate got into a spat over carbon emissions. And somehow, Greta came out looking petty. It all started when Tate, a man best known for flexing cars and fragile masculinity, taunted Greta with a tweet about his luxury vehicle collection and their enormous emissions. Classic Tate nonsense. But Greta's reply? She dropped the now legendary line about sending his car list to getalife.com, among other more PG insults. Cue the Twitter explosion. Memes were born about this. Thunberg was hailed as a clapback queen, but not everyone was clapping. Critics pointed out that Greta, our self-appointed global conscience, just resorted to the oldest insult in the book. Mature, right? Suddenly, the poster child for youth-led climate reform sounded less like a Nobel nominee and more like a bored teenager with Wi-Fi and a grudge. It did not help that this tweet became the highlight of her online presence for months. Because when you are supposed to be saving the planet, but your most viral moment is a dick joke, priorities might need a little rebalancing. Look, Tate deserved the roast, but Greta dropping to his level made it look like a cage match between high school debaters on Monster Energy drinks. The climate deserved better. So did we. How dare you? Greta's 2019 speech at the United Nations was meant to change the world. Instead, it launched 1,000 memes and just as many eye rolls. How dare you, she declared, seething with enough fury to curdle milk. She accused world leaders of stealing her childhood, ignoring science, and dooming future generations to a world of mass extinction. Subtlety? Never heard of her. Fans praised it as a raw, emotional gut punch. But let's be real, it played more like a doomsday audition for The Handmaid's Tale. Her delivery was half courtroom testimony, half haunted child from a horror movie. And sure, passion matters, but when you tell an entire room of international diplomats that they have betrayed us, maybe back it up with more than angry stares and apocalypse buzzwords. Even Donald Trump, not exactly Mr. Sensitivity, trolled her by tweeting that she seemed like a very happy young girl looking forward to a bright and wonderful future. Brutal. Look, we get it. The climate crisis is urgent. But yelling, "How dare you," without offering a single actionable policy is like screaming at a fire without calling the fire department. Greta's speech was iconic, don't you think so? Barra Mona Lisa Blues. Just when you thought the Thunberg family had maxed out their drama-to-carbon emission ratio, enter stage left. Greta Thunberg, also known as Barra Mona Lisa. In June 2025, Greta's sister released a music performance that was, well, let's say it gave people something to talk about. Within hours, the internet lit up. Not in admiration, but in memes, roasts, and pure, unfiltered trolling. Critics did not just go after Beata's vocals or stage name. They turned it into a referendum on the entire Thunberg household. Because apparently, once you've got one climate crusader in the family, everything your relatives do becomes international news. Greta fans screamed cyberbullying, but others saw it as poetic irony. After all, Greta's spent years publicly shaming people for how they live, eat, and travel. So, when her sister stepped into the spotlight, the public gave her the same treatment. Some called it fair play. Others called it karma in a karaoke bar. Either way, it was a reminder that when your entire family brand is moral superiority, people are going to hold you to absurdly high and sometimes hilariously petty standards. In a weird way, Beata's music career finally humanized the Thunbergs. And by humanized, we mean reminded us that they too can flop. Sailboats and air miles. In 2019, Greta Thunberg set sail across the Atlantic on a zero-emissions yacht to attend the United Nations Climate Summit. It was supposed to be the ultimate mic drop for her don't fly lifestyle. No jets, no fumes, no carbon guilt, just wind, waves, and virtue. Except, spoiler alert, life is more complicated than an Instagram caption. Because while Greta was busy looking stoic at sea, the logistics crew had to fly back and forth to handle the boat. And suddenly, the no carbon footprint trip had the emissions of a small European family vacation. Critics were quick to pounce, pointing out that sailing across the ocean like a 17th century explorer was more publicity stunt than practical solution. Sure, she did not fly, but her team did. And the boat? A high-tech racing yacht made of carbon fiber and corporate sponsorships, not exactly built by forest gnomes with organic rope. Supporters argued that the trip raised awareness, but critics said it raised eyebrows. Because when your travel plans require other people to rack up air miles on your behalf, that's not a climate solution. It's outsourcing guilt. You do not get to plant your moral flag on a zero-emissions voyage if the credits were charged to someone else's boarding pass. Oil tantrums in Malmö. What's more Swedish than IKEA and meatballs? Apparently, climate protests that end with police dragging you off an oil tanker. In July 2023, Greta Thunberg was forcibly removed by police after blocking oil transports in the port city of Malmö. She and fellow activists physically obstructed the terminal, delaying shipments and making headlines again. And while some saw it as righteous resistance, others saw it for what it was, an environmental temper tantrum with a high visibility vest. Greta's arrests are starting to feel less like activism and more like tour dates. Malmö was just the latest stop on her Disrupt Everything World Tour, where the goal seems less about policy change and more about getting the perfect mugshot. Critics slam the protest for alienating everyday people who actually rely on fuel, like workers, parents, and, the ambulance that could not get through the blocked road. But for Greta, the ends justify the means. And those ends include making sure your protest has great lighting, maximum tension, and at least 3 different camera angles. Look, fighting big oil is one thing, but when your activism looks more like a flash mob with handcuffs, people stop listening and start rolling their eyes. Burnout in the spotlight. By 2025, even Greta's biggest fans had to admit the magic was starting to fade. Once hailed as the child prophet of climate doom, Thunberg's act began to feel like a reboot stuck on repeat. Outlets like Quillette criticized her increasingly tired slogans, such as "Our house is still on fire" and "Act like the crisis is real," and pointed out that at 22, she no longer has the novelty of childhood rage to sell her message. The world has moved on to newer, shinier activists. And Greta? She's stuck yelling the same lines like it's opening night every night. The problem is not the message, it's the delivery. Greta's intense, almost theatrical style, once electrifying, now comes across as scolding and repetitive. It's like being trapped in a never-ending group project with the one student who insists everyone's doing it wrong. At some point, the world collectively sighed, "We get it. Now what?" Being famous for calling out adults only works when you are the youth. But aging out of prodigy status means Greta now has to compete in the crowded world of grown-up advocacy, where sloganeering alone doesn't cut it. And let's be honest, former wunderkind turned loud roommate is a tough rebrand. Capitalism for sale. In 2022, Greta released her long-awaited climate change manifesto, a book filled with essays, warnings, and dire calls to action. The irony? You had to buy it, in stores, with money, wrapped in packaging, distributed globally, promoted with hashtags. In short, a full-blown capitalist launch for an anti-capitalist rant. You cannot make this up. The girl who once called economic growth a fairy tale suddenly had her own product line. Notebooks, posters, box sets, the whole environmental Etsy starter pack. Critics could not believe it. Greta, the anti-consumerism crusader, had entered the merch chat. Supporters claimed the message was more important than the medium. But when you rail against the dangers of consumer culture and then promote your own branded content like a climate-themed influencer, people start raising eyebrows, and maybe a few receipts. Look, everyone's got to pay the bills. But if you are going to call out overconsumption, maybe don't launch your own product line in the same breath. Because nothing screams, "Save the planet," like a hardcover book that shipped 3,000 miles wrapped in plastic. This was less climate revolution and more Greta goes Barnes & Noble. All aboard the Drama Express. Back in 2019, Greta posted a now infamous photo of herself sitting on the floor of a German train, surrounded by bags, looking tragically displaced like a climate refugee in a Deutsche Bahn ad. The caption: "Something about how overcrowded trains show how broken the system is." The implication was clear. Even the savior of the planet cannot get a seat. But plot twist: Deutsche Bahn responded. Politely, but with the energy of a barista correcting your name on the cup. Turns out Greta did have a first-class seat. Not only that, she was sitting in it for most of the trip. The floor moment? Just a brief pit stop in her personal drama documentary. And just like that, the internet turned on her faster than a delayed ice train. Critics called it performative. Others called it manipulative. The photo, intended to spotlight climate-friendly travel, instead made people wonder, are you highlighting train problems or staging a mood board for your next viral post? Either way, when you exaggerate the inconvenience of a perfectly functional train ride just to score climate points, don't be surprised when people call all aboard on the Hypocrisy Express. Tickets, please. Veganism, now with judgment. Greta's not just against fossil fuels, she's also firmly anti-burger. Her loud, proud promotion of veganism has made her the poster child for kale smoothies and tofu blockades. According to her, meat consumption is unsustainable, unethical, and basically climate terrorism in edible form. So if you had a steak this week, congrats, you just personally doomed the Amazon. But while Greta preaches the gospel of oat milk and quinoa, farmers across Europe and North America have a different opinion. Hey, maybe don't destroy our entire livelihood on TikTok. Rural communities were understandably ticked. Not everyone has access to urban vegan alternatives, or the budget for hemp-based chicken. Greta's one-size-fits-none messaging often ignores the nuances of global food systems, cultural traditions, and, oh yeah, the basic concept of personal choice. She has turned ethical eating into an environmental guilt trip, minus the protein. And while plant-based diets are worth discussing, Greta's version comes with a side of moral superiority and a dessert of, you're a bad person. Nothing says building climate coalitions like alienating the people who grow your food. Maybe instead of screaming, go vegan or go extinct, Greta could try, let's eat smarter together. Just a thought, with a sprinkle of iron. Copenhagen Chaos Club. In March 2023, Greta added traffic nuisance to her growing activist resume when she blocked a road during a climate protest in Copenhagen. The result? A fine of 2,000 Danish kroner and a fresh round of, what exactly are you doing? From both supporters and skeptics. Her big plan to stop fossil fuels, sit in the middle of the road like a human traffic cone and make sure nobody gets to work on time. And sure, disrupting traffic is a time-honored protest move. But here's the problem. When you inconvenience everyday citizens who are just trying to live their lives, teachers, nurses, grocery clerks, you stop looking like an activist and start looking like an overdramatic street mime with a sign. This is Copenhagen, not Burning Man. Blocking roads is not going to make ExxonMobil shiver in its boots. It is just going to make a mom late for daycare pickup. And the cherry on top? Greta treated the fine like a badge of honor, because nothing says changing the system like annoying commuters and then smugly paying the equivalent of $300 in protest fees. She is not dismantling capitalism. She is just becoming really good at paying parking tickets for social justice. Iconic, but also kind of irritating. Diplomacy, never heard of her. When Greta is not scolding humanity at summits, she is busy roasting world leaders like it is an Olympic sport. Trump? She mimicked his tweets. Bolsonaro? She sarcastically called herself a brat after he said the same. Putin? She said his kind are threatened by young people. It is like Greta turned the climate crisis into a one-woman roast battle and forgot she is supposed to be the adult in the room. Sure, these men are controversial, but when you constantly mock politicians on a global stage and then demand they take you seriously, the message gets a little muddled. Greta wants to be treated like a world leader, but behaves like someone subtweeting their ex on Instagram. It is not diplomacy. It is digital sass masquerading as activism. Her defenders say she is just telling the truth. But last time we checked, truth did not need a clapback filter. If you want seats at the negotiation table, maybe stop flipping the table over and yelling, "Boomer alert!" every time someone challenges you. Greta is not wrong about the climate, but she is very loud about being right, and sometimes volume drowns out credibility. The United Nations COP24 Conference. In December 2018, a 15-year-old Greta Thunberg stood at the United Nations COP24 conference in Poland and told world leaders they were, brace yourself, not mature enough to tell it like it is. That's right. A teenager with no voting rights or degree basically walked into a room full of seasoned diplomats and dropped a verbal Uno reverse card. Now, was she wrong about climate inaction? Not entirely. But calling world leaders childish in a global forum is less of a rallying cry and more of a high school debate team stunt. It's the rhetorical equivalent of yelling, "You're not my real dad." Critics pointed out the irony. Here's someone lecturing about maturity while delivering a speech filled with passive-aggressive shade and zero tangible solutions. It is one thing to demand action. It is another to deliver a mic drop and leave the room like you just won RuPaul's Drag Race. Greta's COP24 moment may have launched her global fame, but it also launched her brand of youth scorn as activism. And while it plays well on TikTok, it does not exactly build climate coalitions, because calling your audience immature might get applause, but it rarely gets results. Do not talk to me, peasant. In 2020, Greta showed up at the World Economic Forum in Davos and had a hilariously awkward run-in with US Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. After Greta demanded an end to fossil fuel investments, Mnuchin snarked back, "She should study economics before giving us lectures." And the internet loved it. Greta fans called it a misogynistic jab. Critics called it a fair point. Because when you are trying to debate global financial systems with a high school diploma and a backpack full of righteous fury, maybe do not skip Econ 101. Instead of addressing his critique, Greta responded with a vague statement about needing to listen to science. Which, great. But science does not answer questions about inflation, trade policy, or complex energy transitions. That is where, gasp, economics comes in. And that has been Greta's pattern. Drop a moral hammer, ignore the follow-up. It is like playing chess and refusing to move after your opponent takes a turn. The Davos exchange revealed the cracks in her usual formula, because when someone challenges her with actual policy talk, she freezes faster than Arctic ice, which, ironically, she also blames on capitalism. Debate? No thanks, I'll shout. For someone who wants to lead a global conversation, Greta Thunberg has an interesting strategy. Avoid actual conversations. Despite being one of the most famous climate activists on Earth, Greta rarely, if ever, engages in debates with experts, policymakers, or, brace yourself, people who disagree with her. Instead, she sticks to speeches, social media clapbacks, and carefully curated panels where everyone already agrees. It is less open dialogue and more environmental TED Talk with no Q&A. Climate skeptics? Too evil. Economists? Too boring. Scientists who do not match the doom tone? Probably part of the conspiracy. Critics have pointed out that for someone demanding radical change, she offers precious little room for pushback or policy nuance. It is always drama over data, emotions over evidence. And yes, we get it. Debating people who deny reality is exhausting. But you cannot yell, "Listen to the science," and then run away when scientists raise their hand and say, "Actually." If Greta wants to be taken seriously beyond standing ovations and Instagram quotes, she might have to do the one thing she avoids: actually defend her positions in real time. But until then, her version of dialogue remains monologue with dramatic lighting. Blah, blah, blah. Blah. In 2021, Greta delivered what might be her most memeable moment yet, the blah 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 speech. Standing at the Youth Climate Summit, she ripped into world leaders for offering empty promises, repeating blah 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 like a broken record caught in a wind tunnel. And the crowd? Oh, they ate it up. The speech quickly went viral. Fans called it bold. Critics called it childish. And exhausted diplomats, some of whom were actually working on policies, just stared into the void, wondering when climate reform became a spoken word slam piece. Greta's point was clear. Stop talking, start acting. But ironically, she was still talking, loudly, dramatically, repetitively, and without any new ideas. Calling out blah 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 while contributing even more blah is kind of like setting off the fire alarm and yelling at people for not putting out the fire fast enough, while you hold a match. Sure, it made for a great soundbite, but if your climate strategy includes mocking every attempt at diplomacy with kindergarten-level sarcasm, you might lose the grown-ups in the room. Change requires more than slogans. It requires solutions. But all we got was a viral clip and another round of performative scolding. Blah, indeed. Fake arrest. In January 2023, Greta joined a protest against a German coal mine expansion. And oh boy, the footage that followed was a bit too on brand. Cameras caught her being detained by police, only for behind-the-scenes clips to show her casually smiling, chatting with officers, and basically striking a pose like it was a photo shoot for Vogue, Protest Edition. Naturally, critics pounced, accusing her of staging the arrest for publicity. The police later confirmed she was not technically arrested, just escorted away, and that the entire moment was blown up for media effect. Greta defenders said, "She's just fearless." Everyone else said, "That was the most polite fake arrest since the Queen's Jubilee." When your supposed act of defiance looks more like rehearsal for a climate-themed Netflix drama, people stop taking you seriously. The footage went viral for all the wrong reasons. Choreographed chaos, perfect lighting, and a protester who looked more bored than bothered. If the goal was to highlight fossil fuel expansion, it got buried under the drama of whether or not Greta was acting. And if your protest leaves people talking about your smirk and not the mind, you might want to check your priorities. Or at least, the camera angle. And there you have it. For all the drama, Greta Thunberg still sparked a global conversation that got millions talking and caring about the climate. What do you think of Greta Thunberg? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.